This is joint work with Pedro Gomez, who maybe some of you know, and it's entitled Human Capital and the Size Distribution of Firms. The idea for this paper kind of came up when we were thinking about, there was a call to present project, and it was about the idea of productivity differences, Latin America versus developed countries, and that's when we started thinking about this idea. So one of the, I guess, known observations that provides motivation for this paper is that developing countries have, on average, smaller and less productive firms. That's also kind of the idea, and obviously there's a lot of explanations that have been provided. I mean, and they're all, actually, before I saw that Manuel Garcia Santana was here, they actually have an empirical paper where they test all these things. So these are theoretical papers looking at financial frictions and the fact that, countries where there are more financial frictions, firms having difficulties getting finance, not being able to grow, or entrepreneurs deciding to better set, or individuals deciding to become entrepreneurs, given that returns on entrepreneurship are higher than returns on alternative assets. Policy and institutions, I mean, Nessie's paper on the size-dependent policies, which make firms optimally decide to stay smaller. I think this is actually, I'm probably not pronouncing that name right, Grobovcek, very interesting paper about law enforcement and countries where law enforcement is weak and where managers don't want to delegate, delegate so much to middle managers and having problems to grow. Informality obviously is somewhat a link also for the fact that financial friction and policy institutions may lead to firms staying small because they're informal, because they don't get the finance, or because they don't want to comply with policies, or they cannot comply with policies. And then Markus Poscher has a paper talking about skill-biased technological change and how that affects managerial quality, so to say. So the skill-biased technological change affecting, differently managerial quality. So we want to, these are all great papers. And I mean, as I said, there's this empirical paper where they actually look at these financial friction and policy institutions and find them to matter across countries. And what we want to look at here is study the role of human capital as another possible explanation of why developing countries have smaller and less productive firms. And I will be specific in what way we think that this might affect. So to first start out, we're going to look at some empirical evidence to relate firm size and educational attainment, where we look at cross-country data on average size of firms, look at two data sets, World Bank Enterprise Survey and the GEM, Global Entrepreneurship Monitor Survey, and we look at educational attainment from the Barrowly data set, the standard ones. And we relate these in simple regressions, basically cross-country regressions, typically controlling for GDP per capita and population, but then we also run a lot of robustness checks controlling for institutional and financial variables. I'll be more specific and tell you, but basically what we find to be very robust as the firm size increases with the share of secondary educated. And for us, at least at first, we didn't expect that so much. We kind of thought it was tertiary educated. I mean, I don't know, that was our first impression, but it's very much the secondary educated, whereas the share of tertiary educated workers doesn't really matter at all. You'll see. So basically what's kind of the takeaway from this is secondary educated workers seem to matter. And the key idea is that why could that be important? And what we think is that, not what we think, but if you think about production requiring skilled and unskilled jobs, then where are the secondary workers, right? I mean, if you have three classifications of educational attainment, so primary, secondary, tertiary, you can think of secondary educated workers.
High school graduates, secondary.
Yes, high school graduates and some college. I'll define it, but it's, yeah. So secondary educated workers, you could think of being able to obviously perform unskilled jobs, but also being able to perform, we'll show with a certain caveat, but being able to perform skilled jobs. So they're somewhere in the middle. This is just an anecdotal point, but when I was reading the famous Golden and Katz book on the race of education and technology, they talk a lot about the expansion of the high school system in the United States being kind of at the start of the growth and technology expansion. So yeah, it's not directly related, but yes.
Tertiary educated can perform unskilled job too, so I'm not sure it highlights the secondary. All I say is that skilled people can do both skilled and unskilled work.
Yes, in principle, yes. You could think of.
So still, it doesn't differentiate. So when you do the regression with tertiary education, is it the same?
No, there's no effect.
So there has to be something about them that is not where the.
I mean, I would.
I don't think the second bullet point is the same.
I do think that most of, I mean, the fact that there is not much of an effect is because if you look across countries, there's a lot of countries, there's almost, I mean, the fraction of tertiary is very small, right? And a lot of developing countries where only recently the expansion of the there's an expansion of the secondary education. So you have countries where there's 80% of primary educated workers only. So in principle and theoretically, yes, you can think about this. But I guess if you think about the state of the world now, maybe it's not a bad thing to think about that this way. Yes?
Could it be that at a certain level of development, the secondary workers are the skilled workers, basically? I mean, like 100 years ago in the US, that was certainly the case.
Right. Yes.
I mean, now it's sort of more in the middle, but before that, the high school education was to be on
right.
top.
Right.
And it's that way in a lot of developing
right.
countries.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Just to follow up, so now you answered half of the question I wanted to ask, but there is this new literature, which is mostly for developed countries about job polarization, that goes exactly the other way around. That says all the jobs disappearing in the middle. The jobs are either very unskilled type or very high skilled type. So that it seems that your data has a lot of developing countries, because in developed countries, I guess, at least there are some people who say exactly the opposite. These are the workers who are not needed anymore, the secondary educated.
I mean, here, we don't have three types of jobs. We still have only skilled and unskilled, right? It's basically they sort into those two types. I mean, I'm not saying that there is a certain middle part of job type of, I mean, there's two types of jobs here only. There's not going to be a middle part. Simply the guy in the middle of the education distribution can go both ways. Okay, so I don't think it totally goes against it. It doesn't have to say much on this. This is right, but it's not.
But you cannot address this issue.
No. No.
So do we always also see that within country, like those firms that are larger have much more secondary educated workers?
I don't know. I would doubt it, but I don't know. I shouldn't say that. I don't know. I haven't looked at it all. I shouldn't say that.
When you talk about firms, is that including like just single employee firms?
No. So then with this idea, we kind of plug this into the...
Sorry,
yes.
Can I interrupt you?
Yes.
So when you say that they can,
Yes.
I mean, what do you mean that they can? So what we are talking about is the data, right? So we can see equilibrium. I mean, the U-shape that you guys were talking about, that's an equilibrium outcome, right? Doesn't mean that they cannot. It's what it is. But it doesn't mean that...
In the model that can, I mean, this is in the model they can do it, right? You can hire, as an entrepreneur, you can hire secondary guys to perform unskilled jobs or skilled jobs.
So even though we are working in the office, getting back, we can go back to the fields and collect our issues.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, you can, in the model you can, right? So we take this idea into the model, very typical occupational choice, Lucas span of control model, where production now requires unskilled and skilled jobs. So this is where the type of skills come in. CS production function, according to Corsell and co-authors. And so now the workers with a secondary education in this environment, they can be skilled workers, though with a productivity gap with respect to tertiary educated workers, or they can be unskilled workers, and thus with a productivity premium, so they're somewhat better at collecting oranges.
So there are managers and then two types of workers? Or
Yes, we also have, I mean, they're going to be also different in terms of managers, but that's, I'll show you.
so both skills can be managers too?
Everybody can be a manager. Okay, everybody can be an entrepreneur, so to say. I mean, this is all, this is a manager, firm owner here, right, in this framework. Okay.
So in terms of motivation, since you seem to be done with the motivation, just to see why different countries have different productivity, you wouldn't need to really have different types of agents, right? You could start with a Corsell et al. Framework, which is much easier.
I mean, I do want to show you something about the empirical.
Something more that you're.
I do want to show you something more on the empirical part, so the regressions that we run on the secondary education. So the fact that firm size and secondary education is related, that's something that we try to address here. I think that firm size, I mean, in a representative firm model, you don't get differences, you don't get any effects on firm, I mean, you don't get firm size, right? We need the occupation. Yes,
so you
firm
can
size.
address
Firm size.
also facts about firm size.
Yes, so this is actually our motivation, the fact that there's a relationship between the fraction of secondary educated workers in a country and the size of the firm, a positive relationship. And I'll show you that motivation. I'm still there. So maybe I should have stuck with that before telling you what I will do later on. I just yes.
I think somebody already said this. So confused. So you're assuming that secondary education can work for both, and the other guys cannot.
Yes.
Or is it just a equilibrium outcome?
No, it's an assumption. It's an assumption. Yeah, it's an assumption. Yes. And then within that framework that assumes this, we'll have three effects how education can alter how the composition of the labor force can alter the productivity and output. So I mean, the first one, that's what you said. You just have a different mix of human capital, and then by definition, that's going to affect your output, and you have that in representative firm model. You don't need any of this. But then in occupation choice model, you have an effect on who becomes an entrepreneur, right? Given that you have different wages for different education groups, they will decide to become an entrepreneur at different thresholds, right? And then on top, if you do differentiate also the managerial talent by education, then you can have that education composition of the labor force affects the overall distribution of managerial talent, right? So more education can also improve the aggregate managerial talent. And then the idea of linking firm size in developing countries, smaller firm size to lower educational attainment, especially lower secondary education attainment, is this idea. So these countries, developing countries, have a high fraction of workers who only have primary education, right? That by definition is going to make it difficult, and that is because of that assumption, right? The primary educated workers cannot do the skilled jobs. You'll have.
So how should I think about primary education in the data? That's less than 6 years of education?
No, it's less than high school completion. It's without high school diploma, not having finished, dropouts. Okay, that's, yeah. And then the second, so now we differentiate those two. There's actually a second part where we look at public sectors and the effect of the public sector. So many countries have large public sectors. So on average, about 15% of total employment works in the public sector in a lot of countries. That's also true for the US, more or less. And then not only is the public sector important, but it also hires very biased towards skills, right? So in the EU, workers with a tertiary education are about 2 to 3 times more represented in the public sector than in the private sector. Or you look at Latin American countries and you have similar data, and you can look at a bunch of countries. So the public sector hiring more skilled workers also kind of does an absorption of skilled labor, which would furthermore reduce the amount of skill in the economy. Okay? So what we do then is we calibrate the model to the US. So we take the education composition and the public sector employment, and then we look at time series. So what we do is we feed in the evolution of the educational composition, and we see what the model says on the change in entrepreneurship and firm size. Then we feed in education composition in Mexico and see how much of productivity and firm size difference can be explained. And then we replicate our empirical cross-country regression, which, next time I'll show it first because I think that helps a little more for the motivation. And look what we can see on the relationship of firm size and educational attainment. And then later, so that's why I'm saying we separate this. Later we'll see what the biased public sector employment does to all of this. Okay. So here's a little more unrelated literature. I already talked about this, the firm size distribution, so the effect of different aspects across countries that are different on smaller firms in developing countries. In a broader sense, you could think of that being a way of education, like externalities of education via occupational choice. And also the second part of the paper is related to the effects of public sector employment and private sector outcomes, where most of these literature does not really distinguish between what kind of labor is hired in the public sector, right? So here it depends on if you hire tertiary or secondary or primary educated. One of the few who do that for Sweden is this paper, and they actually find, for instance, in Sweden, so to say, the propensity of the public sector in Sweden to hire more primary educated than the US public sector kind of explains a lower college premium in Sweden versus the US. Hammermesh just points out that in the sense that this skill-biased hiring of the public sector in developing countries might hinder development. And this recent paper by Cavalcanti and Santos, they have this choice between occupational choice working in the private and the public sector, which we don't have. So we don't have a choice to work in the public sector. We won't talk about wage premium in public and private sector, which they do. You'll see. And then, yeah, Pedro, my co-author, has some paper on the public sector, but without the differentiation by skill group.
Sorry.
Yes.
Are you thinking of the public sector as stealing the higher skill ones for the same job from the private sector, or they have different jobs in the public sector?
No, they steal them, but they don't pay higher wages. So in the sense that you're indifferent as a worker, you don't care which sector you go to, right? So it's kind of an automatic thing that the public sector hires so many of the tertiary educated that, I mean, they produce whatever their wage bill is, but that's their production. There is no.
If the public sector has all the schools and the teachers are higher educated, then it's really not a problem. That's public sector. It's just they're doing the same job anyway, right? So it's not like they will do some other job in the private sector, and the public sector will absorb it.
No, I mean here the assumption is that the public sector is going to be less productive. Okay, it's just going to be basically there's no capital in them. It's well, you'll see. So here's the motivation, which should have come first. So our empirical study that uses data on average firm size, the World Bank Enterprise Survey, where we have a lot of data, 135 countries. A lot of firms between 2000 and 2012, and we look at average firm size. We also do as a robustness check controlling for age and sector. And then Markus Poschke was so nice to give us his data on the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor Survey that includes 50 countries. There's some developed countries, so it's not the same, it's not a subset of those. These are different countries, and it just says average firm size by country. And then the data on educational attainment, as I said before, is Barron't-Lee standard data, and this is our definition, so this I should have said that for. Primary is no schooling, primary completed, high school not completed. Secondary is high school completed, college not completed, and tertiary is just college completed. Okay, and then we run regression of the log of average firm size on education. This is what we do. We control in principle for GDP per capita and population, but then we do these robustness checks. We look, the typical institutional variables, the World Bank governance indicators. Look at financial developments, so domestic credit, private sector, stocks traded, so these things that indicate financial development. And then this is the paper that I talked about before, where they use a bunch of these controls, also include informality, percentage of foreign firms. And we do all this, and the results are really robust to all of these. I guess you can find, if you look for it, you can find something, but they're very robust to the inclusion of a lot of these variables. And we also try to do this with OECD data on firm size, but it's a very small sample. So.
Did you try including alphabetism? Because there's a direct relationship between the ability to read and write and the number of people that you can control.
Okay. Yeah, so now it's it's in primary because it's no schooling, it's in primary, but we didn't. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't. So this is the result in pictures. I'll show you some coefficients later. So this is for the enterprise survey population with secondary education completed and the firm size in log. So it says model, but it's the data. I don't know what it says. And then we have the same for the global entrepreneur survey. And the points are spread out, but there's a positive, fairly positive relationship. Here. Yeah. We that's our. Okay.
It says model firm size.
No, that's what I'm saying. This is wrong. It's a data. It's a data, and this is the model OLS regression from the enterprise survey, where log firm size, the share of population with secondary education, with tertiary education, income per capita, and population. So I guess the point here is that we include secondary education and tertiary education. Secondary is the one that's robust, and it kind of indicates that for, if you compare to a country with one with 10 percentage point higher share of secondary educated, you would have 1 to 2 more workers in the average firm. So to say, the average firm size increases by 1 to 2 workers, right? Here by 1, here by 1.5. Yes.
Why don't you include
You
primary?
don't want all the 3 of them, right? Because that's kind of, it's like primary is 1 minus this, right?
Well, a lot of the poor countries
High, no? Very high level of primary.
No, should be low.
No, primary is no schooling also.
So you
No schooling is included.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I think you are measuring based on the average you said or median?
Average firm size.
Okay. I mean, because the firm size distribution is so thick-tailed that personally I think it might, a better measure might be just to estimate a Pareto tail for the right tail and relate the thickness of that tail to education. Because like if you look at the US, the average employment I think went from 19 to 21 over 30 years. But it's not clear, you know, if, for example, there's a decrease in the number of firms who employ 1 to 5 employees. If that goes down, you can get the average shifting by 1 or 2, as opposed to if you have an increase in number of firms that have more than 10,000 employees, and they will have different implications. So I think you might want to look at a right tail measure, and not to substitute for this, but in addition to this, that would tell us something.
Yeah, I mean in the enterprise survey maybe we'll have to check this.
You have data on 130,000 firms, right?
Yeah. I know that these are the enterprise survey. I know it's coded but from below. So this is actually firms I think with more than 5 employees or something.
Okay.
It's not doesn't include everybody, but it shouldn't be any. Yeah, they should have the big firms.
Manufacturing firms.
In the enterprise survey, they are. Yes. And then if we only include tertiary education, there's not much.
So
And then yes.
How would this relationship look if you just regressed on years of education?
I don't know, but this is easy to do. Yes. I mean, if it made sense, then you shouldn't see much, right? But I don't know. I'll check it. Yes.
So you get an R squared of like 1 to 16?
31, 28.
So you explain 16% of the various. So
I mean, that's.
a sense of how that compares to some of those other explanations that I proposed.
Yeah, I should. No, I don't, but I should. I mean, it's clear that financial restrictions are very important. I mean, that's one important policy. But I should check that. Yes.
So, do you control for some measure of openness? Like I could imagine that if you're in a country where multinationals are common, right? You probably count them as big firms in that, or
yes, and there is
incentives also
yes.
to become educated, or if it's in line with your model story, fine, right? But
No.
That paper by Manuel Garcia.
They have the fraction of foreign firms. So this is one control, the fraction of foreign firms.
Important factors in the
Okay, so that would be controlled for.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, not in this one, but like all the Russell check, and they changed relatively little. So it's about between 1 and 2. And I mean, I think there's a relative surprising thing is that this is enterprise survey, and this is the other data. Okay, this is not only manufacturing. This is this global entrepreneurship monitor survey.
Both dummies and the controls.
Again?
Why don't you have any estimation with both educational dummies and the controls?
Oh, okay, those two and.
Yeah.
I don't know. Good question. I should. I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I'll check it.
Also, maybe you could check for just subsets of countries, like countries with above a certain fraction of tertiary education, and see if the non-relationship holds also for those countries.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Because part of it might be that you have a lot of countries with very low levels of tertiary.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like you said.
No, I mean here, yes. Here less so. Okay, this is all developing countries, basically developing and emerging countries. Here you have developed countries, and also we do this for OECD, which is, I mean, it's obviously not as robust because you can't put that many controls in there, but it's also still the relationship holds. Secondary does, tertiary does not. So this is that was our motivating relation. So that we think that there's a fairly robust relationship between firm size and secondary education, given the state of the education as it is in 2005, I think this is. And then the idea is, the secondary education seems to matter, to take this to a model. Take a Lucas span of control model where we have these 3 education levels of the household members. So we take one household, no distributional things that we address here. So a fraction has primary education, another fraction secondary education, and the remaining tertiary. And then also we assume that they're endowed with different managerial abilities. Okay, but this is not crucial. I will show you later. But in principle, they could, right? You could think that primary educated draw from a different managerial distribution than secondary and then tertiary educated. Okay, and according to their abilities, the household members decide to be entrepreneurs or employees. Okay, so here's a nice picture that shows how production works. This is very much, I mean, this is Crossell and co-authors, output being produced by unskilled labor, capital, and skilled labor, and then the elasticities of substitutions between the unskilled labor and the capital and skilled labor governed by sigma, and the elasticity of substitution between capital and skilled governed by rho. Then what's kind of new here is this part where we say unskilled labor is actually a combination of secondary and primary educated workers, right? So, and primary educated workers, so to say, their work input is kind of weighted with the smaller than 1 factor. This is kind of the productivity discount, if you want to, primary versus secondary educated workers carrying out unskilled jobs, okay? And this elasticity of substitution between those for carrying out unskilled jobs. And similar for skilled labor, we have tertiary and secondary educated, and here the productivity discount, if you want to, is on the secondary educated, which, and the elasticity of substitution between those two is phi, which is psi, no? Psi. And here's a production function, which, well, I guess looks very similar. So just to repeat, workers are primary educated, hired for unskilled jobs. This is the assumption. And with a university degree are hired for skilled labor. So I guess, yes, you can, if you think about Spain, people always say the tertiary educated work in the unskilled jobs. But this is, I mean,
Do you know from the data if that is equipment or structures?
Actually, what is true here, we only have, I mean, here we only have equipment, right? We don't have structures.
How do you define firm size in this model?
Establishment size, so workers per establishment.
What kind of work? How do you aggregate bodies and human capital?
How do I, like, I mean, it doesn't matter if you're primary, secondary, or tertiary.
No, but there's also skilled and unskilled.
No, but this, when I aggregate the number of workers, it's primary, second. I mean, it's those guys.
And you just count the bodies?
Yes. I don't basically, when I count them, I don't like discount them with their value that they have for production. Okay, I just count them. Yes. So, this production function. Well, the TFP and the Q here, the price of capital is just, I'll show you, it's just going to be for calibration for the time series. But that's all. It's not going to be, across countries, we don't assume anything on this. Okay, this is just one.
Let me repeat my question.
Yes.
So I'm a firm, I demand XN and XH. That's my decision.
No, you decide this. You decide how many primary, do you decide on how many primary?
Okay, substitute.
Yeah. So you really decide on like how many people with primary education do I hire for this, how many of secondary. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you say that the firm size is the number of workers?
Yes.
In the data for the regressions also?
Yes.
And, so I don't know how this might affect the results, but how about the informal, the non-register? Because that can be especially important for primary educated, right?
So they're not in the, I mean, in enterprise server definitely not, because it's manufacturing, as she said, it's above a certain threshold. They're not informal. And the global entrepreneurship monitor server, I doubt also that they have. There's no informality in there. That's true. So the data is without. I mean, the only thing that we do with informality is in the regressions control for, but it's not. The measure of firm size is not included. That's true. So it's kind of like, if you want, it's upward bias, no?
Okay. Yeah. But probably it can be measured the firm size in a different way to see.
You mean in the data?
I mean, to see how.
I mean, I don't know. At least we weren't aware of like a lot more, but if you know one, tell me.
Yeah, you only have the sales as another measure that you can use from enterprise servers. And I think the problem with informality is that they don't appear in the data at all. So.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there are some like, but I don't know. Okay, so here's the firm's problem. So this is what you're asking, right? This is the firm maximize choosing each type of worker for each type of activity. So it chooses how many primary educated workers do I hire to carry out unskilled jobs, how many secondary do I hire to carry out skilled jobs, how many secondary do I hire to carry out skilled jobs, how many tertiary. And as a result, it's just a typical, marginal productivities have to equal the wage. And then for the secondary educated workers, the margin productivity in the unskilled jobs and the skilled jobs have to equal the wage of the yes.
So I guess the complementarity is going to matter a lot within like the elasticity of
Yes.
substitution, the nested one at the end, right?
It matters, yes, yes.
But then, if I remember correctly, you don't have any weights for those guys.
Here. These, you mean
I thought, is that a CES weight or is that the actual wage premium?
no, this is a weight, so this is, I don't know if that's what you mean, but this is a weight, so this is like the discount of a primary educated worker doing unskilled jobs. His weight as an unskilled worker, being smaller than 1 versus a secondary whose weight is 1. I don't know if that.
I think what he means is if you make that, you put the elasticities to become that elastic, the shares are half, right?
Okay, yes.
So it's asking about those weights. You made some assumption about the weights.
So you could make it like the other, like you have the lambda and 1 minus.
Oh, okay, I got you what you mean.
Similar down there, that's what they're saying.
Okay, I understand what you mean.
Assumption that progress rates are.
Okay, I understand what you mean. Yes. Okay. Yeah, no, we didn't do that, but yeah.
I mean, could you also just make efficiency units provided by the secondary workers or the other workers perfect substitutes? I mean,
sure.
Is it important that they not be perfect substitutes?
I mean, if they were perfect substitutes, you probably would have the same. You would have the same weight, right? You would have the same weight for the primary and the secondary educated. No, and that is not true. You have high school premium, so that you can't do, given the data, right? I mean, because then if they're the same, they have the same margin productivity.
They could have different wages, though, but it'd just be multiplied by the number of efficiency units.
Okay, I have to think. I mean,
yeah,
I'll have to think about it. So these are the first order conditions, which kind of show the firm how many high school versus tertiary they hire to carry out tertiary skill jobs, and that basically being defined by the college premium and this discount and the elasticities, the elasticity of substitution in skilled work. And similarly for the unskilled works, how many primary versus secondary I hire depends on the college premium, the high school premium in wages, and the productivity and the elasticities.
But what is funny in this, that I think even the functional forms, you force them to hire this kind of mismatched workers, no? Because there is at 0 they have plus infinity as marginal productivity given. So you force them to hire skilled, secondary for both for unskilled and skilled, because of I guess CS marginal productivity is go to infinity as they go to 0. So you kind of force this to happen, which may be fine, I don't know. But at the firm level, I don't know whether there is a better way. Maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I guess in the aggregate, the idea is we know that secondary are somewhere. We don't, and our idea was like they must be in both.
At the firm level,
yeah.
At the aggregate, I guess there is this mismatch. But the firm level,
for those surveys, do you have information about the education of workers at the firm level? Because that will help you to pin down some of these parameters.
I think in the enterprise survey you have like skilled and unskilled, but that's all. You don't have, so it's kind of the same problem. Yeah. But I can check that. So also the standard problem, choosing your capital and investment, have some returns on capital which are taxed, and then the wage returns for each of the education groups, and the profits, and they're also taxed. So the wages of the workers, 3 types of workers, and the profits of the entrepreneurs, the 3 types of entrepreneurs.
So what is PS?
P is a fraction of the primary in the economy, S is a fraction of the secondary, and T, which is actually 1 minus P minus S, is the fraction.
These are exogenous.
Yes.
Those
yes.
are given for the house.
Yes. Yes.
And it's the same tax?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
What do you do with the tax? You just throw it away?
You finance the government, the public employment.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah. So the household choice is just Euler equation and the 3 marginal entrepreneurs, where wages have to equal the profits of the marginal entrepreneurs. Here are the taxes. The government. So the government basically produces the government consumption goods, which is just the wage bill of the government. That's all. Choose the level of public sector employment and the composition of workers. So how many of my public sector employers are going to be tertiary, secondary, and primary educated? Collects taxes on wages, profit, and capital income, and then has a budget constraint. So this is where the taxes come in. These taxes on capital income in on wages and on the profits have to finance the government's wage bill. Okay, this is the whole thing.
So they don't enter into utility of household?
No.
Government output?
No, this is, no.
So
I mean, they get the wages, but yes.
In your data of these government employment people, are they all in administrative, or are they actually in health and education sector, or even some enterprise?
In any of those, yes. So it's clear, I mean, it's obvious, in a certain sense, it's obvious that the government hires more tertiary educated because it, runs universities, runs hospital. I mean, there's an explanation for it, obviously. Yeah.
You have 10 minutes.
Yes. So.
Okay, then I don't ask.
For the benchmark, we're going to assume neutral public sector employment. And I will show you that for the US, this is not a strong assumption, but it makes things much more clear. And then to be able to say something about educational attainment and then to say something about biased public sector hiring. So for the benchmark, we assume that the fraction of public employees is equal to the fraction with primary education is equal to the fraction of primary educated in the economy. Okay, it's neutral. We don't want, the distortion of the government will come in later. Okay. So equilibrium definition, I guess I can skip this. This is typical. And we're going to look at, yes?
Just quickly. So a more productive manager will hire more workers.
Yes.
And he will respect those ratios that you showed.
Yes. Yes.
And so if more education means they're better managers, that's going to affect firm size. Do you
Yes.
agree with that?
Yes.
So in the empirical, I don't know whether you could do this, but in some way you may want to separate this effect because I think when you related empirically on the secondary, I think you're thinking of the workers, but there is a direct effect that if there are better managers in that economy, firm size will go up as well.
Right. But I think that could be one with a regression, the cross-country regression. We don't know if that's.
So that's one interpretation.
Right. So here's a calibration. The fixed parameters, relatively standard. Discount factor, depreciation rate. This is a fraction of primary, secondary, and tertiary educated, which you take from Barrow and Lee, and public employment in the US, which is about 15%. Okay. Then, it's clear that the elasticities of substitution play a large role here, right? The elasticity of substitution capital, unskilled, skilled capital, and then kind of this, I guess the idea from going back to Crosell and Cauther is to use the price of capital, the fall in price of capital, to get at the increase in college premium despite the increase in college educated. So we take the price of capital from, the inverse, right? From the 90s and the 80s, from Cummins and Violante, and these are just Barrow and Lee numbers for the primary and secondary and tertiary educated in 90s and 80s. We can go back. So this is, we're still working on getting like the calibration. This is a local minima, so we're still estimating and trying to totally to minimize the difference in targets and model statistics. But this is, for now, it gives us a fairly good result. Here are the calibrated parameters. So the thing about the managerial talent distribution here is that all the distributions share the same. It's a Pareto distribution, I should say that. Pareto distribution that's share the same location and scale parameter, but have different shape parameters here for tertiary, secondary, and primary educated. Okay, and the way we pin down these different distributions is basically look at the mean establishment size on the one hand, and then the mean establishment size by type of entrepreneur. By entrepreneurs with secondary educated that have small average firms, and then managers with tertiary educated, and managers with primary, or firm owners with primary educated who have smaller firms than those with secondary or tertiary educated.
But I thought you didn't have that.
What?
I thought you didn't have those data.
I didn't have?
You didn't have, the education of the manager from the data you have the data. Like, do you know
This is U.S. data. Okay, I have this from the survey of business owners. This is all calibrated to the U.S. For the cross-country data, I don't think I have. Yeah. So, and these are the firm size distribution, establishment shares of like small and large firms. Kind of pin these down. Span of control parameter, the weight of unskilled labor in production, and so on. Here, I think the important, maybe the ones that are a little more important are the rho and the sigma, which are a little different from, Crosell and co-authors, but not super different. Here I think they have like 0.40, and this is the 0.50, minus 0.50. So it's around the values. Here's how the model does in terms of targeting the data. And as I said, it's still not there yet, but we're somewhat able to get a fall in the what's the college premium? Here's a college premium. So a rise in the college premium over time, and somewhat the high school premium has remained relatively constant. It hasn't changed that much. And then some non-targeted moments. So some more moments on the establishment on the firm size can be matched. So this is the firm size distribution to show you. I mean, it's not super different. That's why I was pointing out. Actually, we did this model first with a unique distribution, not assuming different distributions for different managers. It's not super different, okay? But they suggested that we also take into account difference in manageriality by education. That's why we did it. But when you do it, as you saw, the parameters weren't that different. And there's some difference here, right, in the tail. But actually in the first part, you don't even see the difference. So here's time series. So what we do in the time series version is we only change educational composition. Okay, we leave the Q constant. So we use the Q to calibrate the difference in the price of capital, and also we did different TFP. We calibrated difference in TFP, and then we keep everything constant. A constant at 1, Q constant at 1, and we just feed in the difference, the increase in educational attainment in the U.S.
But the
and
distribution of education across managers, does that change?
Again. I mean, so it will as it's a decision, right? I mean, the being a manager is a decision. What we feed in is just this population. I mean, this economy now has more tertiary than the one a decade ago and the one 2 decades ago, and then they make decisions according to that, right? But the distribution of talent within each group remains the same. No, that remains the same. But obviously, one group now represents a larger fraction, and primary will represent a smaller fraction at the 2000s than in the 60s, right? So, you know, it's not great, but you see a rise in output over time with this change in educational composition, and it's around 20%. Obviously, what you said before, you can do that in a representative firm model, and it's not great, but doesn't give, you know, gains a little, not much, on the representative firm size. But then, if you look at average firm size, you can't really say much. Representative firm model can't say anything. On the self-employed, I mean, this can't really be called success, and I'm not sure if I should put out this number, but it goes qualitatively in the right direction, right? So there were more self-employed in the 60s and in the 90s, and that has gone a little, I mean, it goes a little down. Then when we go the first cross-country exercise, well, we just simulate the same economy, but feed in Mexico's education composition, which is, I mean, extremely different. A lot of 75% only primary education, 16 secondary, 9% tertiary. And then you get these results. It's about two fewer workers. You get a lower capital output ratio because you have less skill, right? So if there's fewer skills, there's going to be less capital being used. The college premium obviously increases because, you know, there's then lower supply, and very much the high school premium does increase. And then on the productivity side, the productivity measures, all productivity measures fall basically. And I think it's probably more interesting to show this. So how much we can actually say on the compared to the data. So in terms of GDP per capita, if you look at US versus Mexico, it's about 17% that this model can explain. It's not a lot, but remember here, everything else is equal, right? It's only education composition. There's no story about financial friction. TFP is the same, price of capital is the same.
I guess what you want to show is how much your model has amplification, no? Because what you can do is impose Mexican education distribution and assume US decisions. You can feed all the people don't change their decisions based on that. You have to somehow.
But then you
I don't know how.
yeah.
I mean, I thought it was easy, maybe not that easy. But you have to somehow show how much of you get endogenous responses to this education change versus the effect of education change itself matters.
I mean, I guess somewhat comparison is to look at just the representative firm, where that's just a skill.
Okay, so then that comparison would be.
So the difference is the occupational choice. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So the 1.3 that addresses his question one before, where you said that there's just this pure effect that the Mexicans have lower managerial ability. Well, that's a different question, right?
Everything.
Of course.
So Again, the managerial ability, I mean, it is true it's in here because we assume different distributions. But again, with the unique distribution is not that different from the one. Maybe we should actually do the unique distribution because it's not very different. The point here, this is the amount of human capital in the overall economy, right? That just produces a lower output in Mexico because there's lower human capital. Here you have an amplification mechanism. Why? Because of occupational choices, and you have different wages, and especially the low-skilled guy, the primary educated have very low wages. The college and high school premium are very high. So these guys are going to be entrepreneurs, okay? And they're going to be entrepreneurs at a very low threshold. They're not going to be very productive. Yes. So, oops. So that's our picture with similar. So we run the regression, with similar analysis, and then just to wrap up. When we do the public sector employment that's strongly biased towards skilled labor, which is true in the US, but it's even more true in Mexico. So just to give you one example. So in Mexico, tertiary educated are 9%, and 40% of the public employment in Mexico is tertiary educated. There's a huge absorption of skilled labor. In the US, there is some, but it's not as large. So when we actually do now, and the only thing that we do is change public employment, and then this is percentage changes. So this is 0.99%. Okay, this is 1%. It's not great. There's not large effect. In the US, the only large effect is on the college premium. Okay, but for Mexico, you do see much larger effects. So you do see a huge increase, 100% increase in the high school premium, college premium increases, and especially you do see large effect on output per establishment, private output per worker, and then effects on GDP are around 2% or 1% if you kind of fair enough to include that Mexico has a lot smaller public sector. Okay, so that's why we run this one with a smaller public sector in Mexico, which is actually what's the case. So this is it. Try to convince you that there's an empirical relationship between secondary educational attainment and firm size. We propose this model of occupational choice with CS production function, where we say secondary educated workers can actually do skilled and unskilled jobs. And then kind of for now, our results are the following, that we can explain about 20% of the growth of GDP in US per capita since the 60s, and then about 70% of the GDP per capita difference between US and Mexico. And this one, I guess, maybe we can elaborate a bit more on this one, but public sector hiring, especially when they're biased towards skilled labor, can actually have additional negative effects on productivity and firm size. And yeah, I'll leave you with a picture.
Thank you very much.